17 years old, asleep in the back seat after a night at a concert, and moments later, her throat was slashed so deeply she was nearly decapitated. But the horror didn't end there. Her killer, someone she thought she could trust, sat beside her lifeless body, blasting music, building a bonfire, and snapping photos of her corpse to share online. This wasn't just a murder. It was a performance, staged for the world to witness, and it's one of the most disturbing true crime cases of the internet age. That Sunday morning in July felt like any other summer day for most people. The sun was shining, and many were enjoying their weekend routines. But for a group of young friends scattered across the country, this ordinary morning would become a nightmare they'd never forget. One friend picked up her phone to check her messages and immediately noticed something was wrong. Her group chat was flooded with frantic messages, more activity than she'd ever seen. As she scrolled through the conversations, her heart began to race. There was an image that made her stomach turn. It appeared to show someone she knew, someone she cared about, and something terrible had happened to them. The messages were filled with panic and confusion. Friends were typing rapidly, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. "Did you see what someone posted on Discord?" One message read. "Someone is saying something happened to Bianca," wrote another. The word "dead" kept appearing in the messages, but nobody wanted to believe it could be true. As the disturbing image continued to spread through their online communities, some members were so alarmed that they felt compelled to contact authorities. They weren't sure what else to do when faced with something so shocking and potentially real. The calls started coming into police stations, with people reporting that they'd seen what appeared to be evidence of a serious crime posted online. Meanwhile, across social media platforms, people were beginning to notice an unusual trend. A name was appearing more and more frequently, accompanied by disturbing images that seemed too graphic to be real. Many users assumed it was another internet hoax or perhaps scenes from a horror movie being shared for shock value. The authenticity of the image became a subject of heated debate online. Some communities had a history of sharing fake or disturbing content just to get reactions from people. So many hoped this was just another tasteless joke. People desperately wanted to believe it wasn't real, that it was just someone's idea of a cruel prank. But the more the image circulated, the more people became convinced that something genuinely terrible had occurred. The horror was that instead of the image being taken down or reported appropriately, some people began treating it as entertainment. They started creating memes from the disturbing photos, turning someone's tragedy into jokes and sharing them widely across platforms. The cruelest part was that these images and mocking content were being sent directly to family members of the person depicted. It was as if some people took pleasure in causing additional pain to those who were already suffering. This wasn't just about sharing disturbing content. It was deliberate psychological torture aimed at people who were desperately trying to understand what had happened to their loved one. Kim Devins was going about her normal Sunday routine when the unthinkable happened. She had no idea that across the internet, her daughter's name was trending for the most horrific reasons imaginable. Bianca was a talented young woman with artistic abilities and dreams of modeling. Kim knew her daughter had an active presence online, but like many parents, she didn't fully grasp the extent of her daughter's digital life. For Bianca, social media wasn't just a hobby. It was her primary way of connecting with the world and expressing herself. She had created multiple accounts across different platforms, each one representing different aspects of her personality. This wasn't unusual for someone her age, but for Bianca, these online spaces served as a refuge from the struggles she faced in her everyday life. Online, Bianca could be whoever she wanted to be. She could escape from her own problems and create an identity that felt more authentic to her than her real-world existence. She had built up a substantial following across her various accounts, and many of her online friends had become genuinely important people in her life. Bianca was particularly active on Discord, where she had gained popularity within several communities. She was known for her edgy aesthetic and artistic sensibilities, embodying what internet culture called the e-girl style, characterized by alternative fashion choices, creative makeup, and an overall rebellious appearance. But the same online spaces that provided Bianca with community and creative expression also exposed her to darker elements. Some platforms were known for hosting disturbing content and attracting users with questionable intentions. While Bianca tried to navigate these spaces carefully, she couldn't completely protect herself from their influence. That beautiful July morning in Utica, New York, started with the annual Boilermaker Road Race, a well-known 15K event that drew participants from around the world. As runners crossed the finish line and families celebrated, local police officers had no idea they were about to encounter one of the most disturbing cases they'd ever handle. The calls started coming in from concerned internet users who had seen the disturbing images. People from across the country were contacting authorities, unsure of what they had witnessed but certain that something terrible had happened. The callers didn't know if what they'd seen was real or fake, but they felt compelled to report it just in case. Police officers found themselves in an unusual situation, responding to reports of a possible crime based entirely on images circulating on social media. They had to determine whether these reports had any basis in reality or if they were dealing with an elaborate online hoax. As the calls continued to come in, all mentioning the same name, Bianca Michelle Devins, officers realized they needed to conduct a welfare check. They needed to find this young woman and confirm she was safe, if only to put an end to the disturbing rumors spreading online. When officers arrived at the Devins family home, they were equipped with body cameras that would record everything that followed. Bianca's younger sister Olivia answered the door, and the conversation that followed would change their family's life forever. "Is there a Bianca Devins that lives here?" the officers asked. When Olivia confirmed that yes, Bianca was her sister, she immediately called for her mother. Kim came to the door confused and concerned, wondering why police officers were asking about her daughter. The officers didn't show Kim the disturbing image that had been circulating online, but they explained that they had received reports suggesting her daughter might be in danger. They asked Kim to try to contact Bianca, hoping she would answer her phone and put an end to the growing concern. Kim's confusion deepened as she tried to process what the officers were telling her. She had last seen Bianca the day before when her daughter left for a concert in New York City. Bianca had been in an excellent mood, excited about attending what would be her first major concert as a young adult. Bianca had texted her mother after the concert to let her know she was heading home, just as any responsible teenager would do. She had been enjoying her newfound freedom after graduating from high school just 2 weeks earlier. After years of struggling with mental health issues, Bianca finally seemed to be in a good place and looking forward to starting college in the fall. But reaching Bianca proved impossible. Her phone went straight to voicemail, and she wasn't responding to any messages. As the hours passed and the disturbing images continued to spread online, it became increasingly clear that something had gone terribly wrong. Bianca's journey to that point hadn't been easy. She had first seen a therapist when she was just 9 years old, struggling with separation anxiety that made it difficult for her to attend school. She would cling to her mother, not wanting to be apart from her, and often had to be picked up from school early when the anxiety became overwhelming. Around age 13, Bianca's struggles intensified as she began showing signs of depression. She started isolating herself from friends and family, withdrawing from activities she had previously enjoyed. During this difficult period, she discovered the internet as a place where she could escape from her own mental struggles and create a different version of herself. Bianca became extremely active across multiple social media platforms, building up thousands of followers who were drawn to her artistic content and unique aesthetic. A journalist who later covered her story noted that Bianca perfectly embodied the e-girl phenomenon, a term used to describe young women with edgy, alternative styles who built followings online. As Bianca's behavior became increasingly erratic, her family sought professional help. At 16, she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, a condition that her mother Kim believed explained many of Bianca's mood swings and struggles with self-image. Despite her challenges, Bianca was incredibly intelligent and self-aware, always knowing something was wrong and actively seeking help. Bianca's grandfather Frank watched as she sought treatment and gradually began to return to her role as a devoted big sister to Olivia and Maddie. The family could see their girl coming back to them. There was a brightness in her eyes when she talked about her plans for college and her future career goals. Bianca had immersed herself in her art and was even gaining recognition as a promising young model. She received compliments from modeling agents and felt genuinely good about herself when she was working in front of the camera. It seemed like she had finally turned a corner and was ready to build the life she had always dreamed of. By the time Bianca turned 17, she had developed several different online personas across various platforms. Each identity allowed her to explore different aspects of her personality and connect with different communities. But perhaps most concerning was her active participation on certain image boards that existed in the darker corners of the internet. One online friend later described these spaces as genuinely dangerous places that harbored extremely hostile attitudes toward women. These platforms were known for their anonymous users and lack of moderation, creating environments where disturbing content and misogynistic viewpoints could flourish unchecked. For a vulnerable young woman like Bianca, spending time in these spaces exposed her to people with potentially harmful intentions. As Bianca's online presence grew, so did her collection of male followers who became unhealthily fixated on her. These individuals, known in internet culture as orbiters, would follow attractive young women online, obsessing over them from a distance without ever forming genuine relationships. Elizabeth, one of Bianca's online friends, explained that these men would metaphorically orbit around the women they were attracted to, never getting truly close but never leaving their vicinity either. Bianca was remarkably patient with these followers, perhaps too patient for her own good. She would engage with them regularly, responding to their messages and treating them with kindness, even when their behavior became inappropriate or demanding. This accessibility made her popular within certain online communities, but it also attracted the attention of individuals who saw her kindness as something they were entitled to rather than a gift she chose to give. Among these orbiters was a 21-year-old rideshare driver named Brandon Clark, whom Bianca met through Instagram in May of 2019. To those who knew him from the online communities they both frequented, Brandon seemed unremarkable, just another socially awkward young man who spent too much time on the internet. He appeared to be one of many strange individuals who populated these digital spaces, nothing particularly notable or concerning about him at first glance. After connecting on social media, Brandon and Bianca eventually decided to meet in person and briefly attempted dating. However, Bianca was clear from the beginning about her boundaries and expectations. She explicitly told Brandon that she was not interested in an exclusive, committed relationship. At 17 and preparing for college, she wanted to keep her options open and focus on her future rather than settling into a serious romantic partnership. Brandon appeared to accept these terms initially, at least outwardly. When he began visiting Bianca's family home regularly, he presented himself as understanding and respectful of her wishes. To Bianca's mother, Kim, Brandon seemed like a harmless, nerdy young man who genuinely cared about her daughter's well-being. Kim found Brandon to be polite and considerate during his visits. He came across as the archetypal boy next door, perhaps a bit awkward and goofy, but fundamentally decent. There were no obvious warning signs that suggested he might be dangerous or possessive. His behavior around the family was consistently respectful, and he seemed to genuinely enjoy spending time with Bianca without making unreasonable demands. When Bianca mentioned that Brandon would be accompanying her to a concert in New York City, Kim actually felt relieved. After everything her daughter had been through with her mental health struggles, Kim was comforted by the idea that Bianca wouldn't be attending her first major adult concert alone. Having Brandon there seemed like a safety measure rather than a cause for concern. But as the disturbing images continued to circulate online that July morning, Bianca's friends began to piece together a horrifying puzzle. When they learned that it was Brandon Clark himself who had posted the original image, their initial reaction was disbelief and hope that this was all some kind of elaborate, cruel joke. Discord communities were unfortunately familiar with users posting graphic or disturbing content simply to provoke reactions from other members. Some people seemed to take pleasure in sharing shocking images just to see how others would respond. Given this context, Bianca's friends desperately hoped that Brandon was just trying to scare them or get attention through this disturbing post. But their hopes were quickly shattered when the situation escalated beyond anything they could have imagined. The joke theory became impossible to maintain when Brandon himself called emergency services, identifying himself and providing details that made the horror undeniably real. "My name is Brandon," he told the emergency dispatcher. The victim is Bianca Michelle Devins. The casual way he provided this information, as if he were reporting a minor incident rather than a tragedy, chilled everyone who heard it. But even more disturbing was what he said next. "I'm going to kill myself." For Kim and her family, waiting anxiously at home while police tried to locate Bianca, hearing this information over the officers' radios was devastating. The police at their home could hear the communications from other units, and the family learned in real time that Brandon was claiming to be suicidal and admitting that he had harmed Bianca. Kim struggled to process this information. The Brandon she knew didn't seem capable of violence. The polite, respectful young man who had visited her home regularly and seemed to care so much about her daughter's well-being. It simply didn't make sense that he could have hurt Bianca. The disconnect between the Brandon she thought she knew and the person on the radio confessing to harming her daughter was almost impossible to reconcile. Meanwhile, investigators were working frantically to locate Brandon before he could harm himself or potentially hurt anyone else. He had posted additional disturbing images of Bianca online, including one with the message, "I'm sorry, Bianca." The urgency of the situation was clear. They needed to find both Brandon and Bianca as quickly as possible. The emergency dispatcher tried desperately to keep Brandon on the line, hoping to trace his location and guide police to him. But Brandon was uncooperative, refusing to stay on the call and making it clear that he had no intention of being taken alive. "I'm not going to stay on the line with you," he told the dispatcher. "I'm going to be dead on the ground." However, before hanging up, Brandon did provide one crucial piece of information. He told them exactly where they could find him. He was parked on a dead-end road not far from Bianca's home, waiting for police to arrive and seemingly preparing for a final confrontation. When officers located Brandon's vehicle, they found him armed with a knife and clearly agitated. He was standing near his car, and the responding officer could see that he was dangerous and unpredictable. The officer drew his weapon and tried to communicate with Brandon, repeatedly ordering him to drop the knife and comply with commands. The conversation between the officer and Brandon was tense and surreal. "Where's the girl? Where is she?" the officer demanded, trying to locate Bianca while simultaneously managing the threat that Brandon posed. But Brandon was more focused on his own dramatic finale than on providing helpful information. As the officer moved into position and backup units rushed to the scene, Brandon made good on his threats of self-harm. He slashed himself with the knife, creating wounds that were serious but not immediately fatal. But even in this moment of supposed desperation and regret, Brandon's narcissistic tendencies showed through. He paused to take a selfie of his injured state and posted it to social media with the caption, "Ashes to ashes." The responding officers were eventually able to disarm Brandon and take him into custody after a brief struggle. As paramedics worked to treat his self-inflicted wounds and prepare him for transport to the hospital, investigators made the discovery that confirmed everyone's worst fears. Hidden beneath a tarp near Brandon's vehicle, they found the body of a young woman. Even before any official identification could be made, the responding officers knew they had found Bianca. The vibrant, artistic 17-year-old who had been looking forward to starting college and helping others with their mental health struggles was gone. The news of this discovery needed to be communicated to Bianca's family, but before police could make that official notification, Kim and her daughters learned the truth in the most brutal way possible. Someone had sent the horrific image directly to members of Bianca's family via text message. Olivia was in the kitchen with a friend when she received the message. The scream that followed was unlike anything anyone in the house had ever heard, a sound of pure anguish and disbelief that came from the depths of a teenager's soul as she realized what had happened to her beloved sister. Kim's reaction was a mixture of denial and desperate hope. "It's not her, it's not her, it's not my baby," she kept repeating, as if saying it enough times could somehow make it true. But even as she denied what she was seeing, a part of her knew that her worst nightmare had become reality. Despite her shock and grief, Kim forced herself to remain strong for her surviving daughters. She knew that Olivia and Maddie would need her to hold the family together through whatever came next. "I'm going to be strong and get my family through this," she told herself, even as her world was crumbling around her. For investigators, this wasn't a question of who had committed this terrible crime. Brandon had made his guilt clear through his own admissions and actions. Instead, they needed to work backward from the crime scene to understand why this had happened and what had driven Brandon to take such a drastic and violent action. The prosecution team that would handle the case began their investigation at the crime scene itself, where they discovered that every detail had been carefully planned and staged by Brandon. Nothing about this crime was spontaneous or accidental. It had been orchestrated with disturbing precision. One of the first clues they found was a cryptic message that Brandon had spray-painted at the scene. "May you never forget me." When investigators researched this phrase, they discovered it was taken from a series of Japanese manga called Poon Poon that Brandon and Bianca had read together. These comics were known for their dark, violent themes and had been described as a twisted version of Romeo and Juliet. This discovery raised disturbing questions about how Brandon viewed his relationship with Bianca. Did he see himself as part of some tragic love story, with their deaths serving as the climax of a doomed romance? The reference suggested that Brandon had constructed an elaborate fantasy around their relationship that bore little resemblance to reality. But perhaps even more chilling was another element investigators discovered at the crime scene. Brandon had used a Bluetooth speaker to program his phone to play a specific song on repeat throughout the incident. The song was Test Drive by Joji, which tells the story of someone who is far more invested in a relationship than their partner is. The choice of this particular song seemed to perfectly capture Brandon's mindset. He had convinced himself that he deserved more from Bianca than she was willing or able to give, and he had turned his disappointment into justification for violence. To understand the events that led to this tragedy, investigators began examining the social media accounts and digital communications of both Brandon and Bianca. What they discovered was that the two hadn't attended the concert alone, as many people had assumed. There had been a third person with them, another young man named Alex whom Bianca had met through Discord. Direct messages from Bianca's accounts revealed that she had invited Alex to meet them at the concert and had been worried about how Brandon might react to this arrangement. She was concerned that Brandon might become jealous, despite the fact that she had been clear about not wanting an exclusive relationship with him. When investigators tracked down Alex, he was cooperative and provided valuable insight into the dynamics between Bianca and Brandon that night. He confirmed that Brandon had seemed unhappy about his presence from the beginning and had made his displeasure obvious throughout the evening. The investigation revealed that after the concert, Bianca had sent a message to Alex saying, "I think he saw me kiss you." This simple text message would prove to be crucial in understanding what had triggered Brandon's violent response. The kiss between Bianca and Alex, a normal interaction between two young people who were attracted to each other, had apparently been the catalyst for the horror that followed. Investigators had to determine whether this had been a crime of passion, triggered by Brandon witnessing something that made him lose control in the moment, or whether there had been more deliberate planning involved. The answer to this question would be crucial in understanding both Brandon's mindset and the appropriate charges he should face. As Brandon and Bianca drove back toward Utica in the early morning hours, Brandon made an ominous post on social media. He shared a photograph of what appeared to be the New York State Thruway with the caption, "Here comes hell. It's redemption, right?" This post, made while Bianca was likely sleeping in the car beside him, suggested that Brandon had already made his decision about what was going to happen next. Even as investigators worked to piece together the timeline of events from that tragic night, nothing could have prepared them for the most horrifying discovery they would make during their investigation. The forensic analysis of Brandon Clark's cell phone revealed something that transformed this case from a straightforward murder into something far more disturbing and calculated. The morning after Bianca's murder, prosecutors received an urgent call from the police department. They were told there was something crucial they needed to see immediately, something that would fundamentally change their understanding of what had happened. The forensic team had been working through the night analyzing Brandon's phone, and what they had uncovered was beyond anything they had anticipated. When the prosecutors arrived at the police station, they were set up with a computer, speakers, and headphones. The technicians prepared to show them evidence that would prove to be the most disturbing thing either of them had ever encountered in their legal careers. What they were about to witness was a video that Brandon had recorded of himself murdering Bianca. The realization that such footage existed hit the prosecution team like a physical blow. This wasn't just a crime that had been committed in a moment of rage or passion. It had been deliberately documented by the perpetrator himself. The video evidence revealed a level of premeditation and callousness that was difficult for even experienced prosecutors to comprehend. In the recording, Bianca appeared to be sleeping peacefully in the back seat of Brandon's car. The rear seats had been folded down to create a flat surface, suggesting that Brandon had planned for this moment well in advance. He had positioned his camera by clipping it to one of the air vents on the front dashboard, carefully angling it to capture what was about to unfold. The video showed Brandon reaching into the back seat area and retrieving a knife that he had hidden there earlier. This detail was crucial for investigators because it proved that Brandon had come prepared for violence. The weapon wasn't something he had grabbed in the heat of the moment, but rather a tool he had brought specifically for this purpose. After securing the knife and hiding it from Bianca's view, Brandon proceeded to wake her up. What followed was a conversation that would haunt everyone who heard it. Brandon confronted Bianca directly about the kiss she had shared with Alex at the concert earlier that evening. "You know I saw you kiss him, right?" Brandon asked her. Bianca, still groggy from sleep and probably confused about why they had stopped driving, acknowledged what had happened. "Yeah, and I'm sorry," she responded, perhaps thinking that a simple apology would be enough to smooth things over between them. But Brandon's response revealed the depth of his obsession and entitlement. "Well, I'm sorry, but that's not good enough for me," he told her. His words carried an ominous finality that Bianca probably didn't fully grasp in that moment. It was then that Bianca reminded Brandon of something she had made clear many times before. They were not in an exclusive relationship. She had the right to kiss whomever she wanted, just as he did. After reiterating this point, she asked a simple question that showed she was ready to move on from this conversation. "Are you ready to take me home yet?" For Brandon, this question seemed to crystallize his worst fears. He realized that this might indeed be the end of his time with Bianca, that she was ready to go home and continue living her life without him. Rather than accepting her autonomy and her right to make her own choices, Brandon made a decision that would destroy both their lives. The video captured the moment when Brandon reached for the knife, moving quickly so that Bianca wouldn't see what was coming. She had no opportunity to defend herself or escape because she never saw the attack coming. Brandon had used their conversation as a distraction while he prepared to commit murder. After the attack, Brandon's behavior became even more disturbing. Instead of showing remorse or calling for help, he turned the camera toward himself and began screaming dramatically at Bianca's motionless form. "Bianca, why did you make me do this?" he yelled, as if she were somehow responsible for his decision to kill her. This victim blaming, captured on his own recording, revealed the twisted logic that had driven him to violence. It was only after he had finished recording the murder that Brandon took the graphic photographs of Bianca's body and posted them on social media. The calculated nature of these actions, first filming the crime, then photographing the aftermath, then sharing it online, showed a level of premeditation that was chilling to investigators. Bianca's mother, Kim, was haunted by the knowledge of how close she had been when her daughter was killed. She lived just 10 minutes away from where the murder occurred. If Bianca had somehow been able to escape from the car, she could have called her mother for help and might still be alive today. The fact that Brandon had caught her completely off guard, using their conversation as cover for his attack, made Kim's grief even more profound. Despite being ambushed and having no warning of what was coming, investigators learned that Bianca had fought back against her attacker. This detail brought some small comfort to her family, particularly her grandfather Frank, who was proud that she had battled for her life even in those final, terrifying moments. But the murder video wasn't the only evidence of premeditation that investigators found on Brandon's phone. Their analysis revealed that he had been planning this crime for much longer than anyone had initially realized. Brandon wasn't someone who had simply snapped in a moment of jealousy. He was someone who had been methodically preparing for violence. 2 days before the murder, Brandon had used the Notes app on his smartphone to create what investigators described as a to-do list for carrying out his plan. The list included details about staging the crime scene, setting up speakers for music, and other elements that showed he had thought through every aspect of what he intended to do. The evidence showed that Brandon had also conducted multiple internet searches in the days leading up to the murder, researching various methods of killing someone. He had looked up information about how to choke someone unconscious and how to cut major arteries to cause fatal bleeding. These searches provided additional proof that the murder had been planned well in advance. For investigators and prosecutors, this evidence painted a clear picture of who Brandon Clark really was. This wasn't a crime of passion committed by someone who had lost control in a moment of emotional distress. This was a calculated murder committed by someone who had decided that if he couldn't have Bianca on his terms, then no one else could have her either. The prosecution team believed that Brandon had always intended to kill Bianca when their relationship ended, regardless of how or when that ending came about. He wanted to be with her exclusively, and when she made it clear that she wasn't interested in that kind of relationship, he decided that she would have to die. The kiss with Alex had simply provided him with the excuse he needed to carry out a plan he had already been developing. Brandon was officially charged with second-degree murder and pleaded not guilty. Before the judge delivered the sentence, he was given one last chance to speak. He said he hated himself for what he had done and expressed regret for putting everyone through such pain. He claimed he wished he could apologize to Bianca directly and undo his actions. But Bianca's family did not believe him. To them, his words felt hollow, just another performance, another attempt to paint himself as the victim. They felt his supposed remorse was not truly for what he had done to Bianca, but for the consequences he now had to face. The judge seemed to share their doubts. Believing Brandon's apology lacked sincerity, the court imposed the maximum penalty, 25 years to life in prison. While the sentence was significant, Bianca's family knew their battle was not entirely over. After 25 years, Brandon would be eligible for parole. By then, he would still be in his late 40s with the possibility of decades of freedom ahead of him. For Bianca's loved ones, the ruling was not justice in its fullest form. It was simply the closest the system could come. No sentence, no number of years could ever bring her back. What remained was a life shattered by loss, a family forced to carry a grief that would never truly fade. And while Brandon would one day face the possibility of walking free, Bianca's story had ended forever at just 17 years old.